A haunting question lingers over the frozen fields of Eastern Europe. What if the most unlikely voice in global politics suddenly declares that a small nation can reclaim every inch of its occupied land, turning the tide of a war many called unsurmountable? Imagine the tremor echoing through the Kremlin halls, the whispered panic among generals, the sudden surge of hope in Kyiv streets. Could a single statement reshape the destiny of a continent? The former commander-in-chief has long promised to broker peace, meeting both the Russian leader and Ukraine's president in secret rooms, hoping his influence could end the bloodshed. Yet every effort fell short, ceasefire talks crumbled, and his earlier messages hinted that Kyiv might have to surrender Crimea or Donetsk to secure an end. Those words seemed to seal Ukraine's fate, painting concession as the only path forward. Now, in a startling reversal, he proclaims that Ukraine, bolstered by European and transatlantic allies, stands ready to fight and restore its 1991 borders. He argues that time, patience, and sustained financial aid from the Union and the North Atlantic Alliance could turn the conflict into a decisive victory. The claim is bold, daring, and poised to ignite both supporters and skeptics alike. He then tears at Russia's resolve, calling the 3.5-year campaign a paper tiger that has crippled the Russian economy, leaving gas stations empty and ordinary citizens staring at endless queues. He warns that as Moscow's coffers bleed, the Ukrainian spirit only strengthens, urging Kyiv to press the advantage and perhaps even push beyond its original frontiers. The message ends with a chilling promise: the world will keep supplying weapons for the alliance to decide their own fate. The echo of this declaration still reverberates, forcing the world to ask, will the new stance empower Kyiv to reclaim its full territory, or will it deepen the abyss of conflict? In the wake of that explosive statement, the narrative shifts to a stark contrast. Where once the ex-president urged compromise, he now champions total reclamation. Analysts note that Ukraine's forces have mastered drones, produced homegrown missiles, and refined tactics that outmaneuver a larger opponent. European nations and the transatlantic collective have poured arms, money, and training into Kyiv, evening the odds and eroding Russia's material advantage. The Kremlin's early confidence, soldiers marching with parade coats, expecting swift victory, has faded under relentless resistance. Each failed Russian push, such as the stalled assault on a key Donetsk city, highlights Kyiv's growing dominance. Meanwhile, strategic strikes on ammunition depots and command posts sap Russian firepower and cripple its war economy, driving the ruble down and inflating everyday costs for Russian families. Economic distress deepens, banks close, reserve funds dwindle, and even senior officials warn of recession. This financial strain fuels the former president's claim that now is the moment for Ukraine to act, to seize the initiative while Russia falters. He hints, almost provocatively, that Kyiv might not only recover its lands but perhaps venture further, a notion that rattles Moscow and stokes fear across its populace. As the dust settles, the world watches the gamble unfold. Will Ukraine harness its renewed vigor and allied support to redraw the map, or will the escalating pressure push both sides toward a perilous brink? The answer remains hidden behind the next diplomatic move, the next battlefield echo, and the lingering question that rose with the first daring declaration. Earlier we outlined how Ukraine, bolstered by EU aid and NATO backing, could restore its pre-war borders. But what if that hope turns into a real-world gamble? The former commander-in-chief now declares a radical shift. He says the original frontiers are very much an option. Why would anyone doubt a plan that once seemed impossible? The vision is bold, every lost square kilometer reclaimed, the flag raised once more over Kyiv streets. Imagine the distant rumble of artillery fading as Ukrainian troops march forward, the cold wind carrying the scent of fresh pine from liberated villages. He remembers August, when he sat with the Russian leader in the Arctic reaches of Alaska, still pandering to the idea of a land swap. Today his tone is firm, unyielding. Ukraine, he argues, stands ready, armed, financed, and determined to push back the invader. Yet the message does not stop at encouragement. He turns a scorching glance toward Moscow, calling the Russian effort aimless after 3.5 years of fighting. What does a paper tiger look like on the streets of Moscow? Citizens line up for gasoline, the smell of fuel thick in the air, while news of dwindling supplies spreads like tinder. The war machine guzzles cash, leaving ordinary people to scrape by. Could this economic strain tip the balance? He suggests that as Russia's coffers empty, Ukraine's spirit only grows stronger. The declaration ends with an unexpected tease: Ukraine could take back its country in its original form and, who knows, maybe even go further. Does this hint at a push beyond its own borders? The world watches, holding its breath for the next move. Just now we've seen how the narrative moved from cautious optimism to outright challenge. But how will the Kremlin react when its own people feel the crunch of empty shelves and endless queues? Will the looming economic pressure force a change in strategy, or will it fuel a desperate last stand? The answer may reshape the entire conflict. How could a leader who once urged a small nation to surrender its land now proclaim that the same country can reclaim every inch of its territory? What hidden forces are pushing this dramatic reversal, and could it spell a decisive end to the conflict? In the previous segment we saw the stark contrast between the former viewpoint and today's bold claim. Now, the revelation unfolds. For years, the former president painted Ukraine as the underdog, too feeble to triumph over a far larger foe. He urged President Zelensky to bargain, to cede districts in exchange for peace, insisting that concession was the sole realistic road for Kyiv. But the tide has shifted. Analysts worldwide whisper the same startling verdict: Ukraine, once on the brink, now stands poised to push back. On paper, the odds once favored Russia's massive army, its endless armor, its crushing firepower. Yet the battlefield has rewritten the script. Ukraine has hardened, refined, and surged ahead. Its drones now buzz like angry wasps over ruined fields, delivering precise strikes that echo with the sharp crack of steel. A homegrown missile program rises, matching the world's elite, its rockets humming with promise. Tactics have evolved, outwitting opponents at every turn, turning each encounter into a chess move where Kyiv always seems a step ahead. Behind this surge lies a fortress of allies. The United States, France, Germany, Poland, the Nordic states, and the United Kingdom pour weapons, funds, training, and humanitarian relief into the Ukrainian engine. Their support balances the scales, eroding the Kremlin's theoretical advantage in manpower, money, and machines. Russian planners never imagined such an outcome. At the invasion's launch, soldiers marched with parade uniforms tucked in their packs, certain a swift victory would follow. They expected to hoist their flag over Kyiv within days, eyes glazed by confidence. Instead, each failed assault reverberates with the smell of burnt fuel and the clatter of exhausted boots. In Donetsk, Russian forces have wrestled for months over the town of Pokrovsk, throwing everything they have, yet unable to claim it. Meanwhile, Ukrainian units have reclaimed 5 times more ground in the same sector, their progress marked by the triumphant roar of reclaimed artillery and the quiet determination of exhausted defenders. Strategic drone raids now skim over ammunition depots, command posts, and airfields, each explosion a blunt reminder that Russia's war machine is fraying. The Russian economy sputters, the ruble tumbles, banks shut their doors, daily goods cost double what they did years ago. Even the nation's own finance minister warned of a looming recession. All these signs point to one stark truth: Ukraine now holds the strategic high ground and can press its advantage to drive the occupiers out. And just when the world thinks the conflict has settled into a grim stalemate, a whisper from the former president hints at a daring new possibility: could Kyiv's forces someday cross the border, turning the tables on the very heart of the Russian state? The answer hangs in the air, waiting for the next decisive move. Could a single statement reshape a global conflict? President Donald Trump just issued what may be his boldest, most shocking claim about the war in Ukraine. He says Ukraine, backed by Europe and NATO, can reclaim every lost kilometer and push the Russian front back to its pre-invasion borders. Why not, he asks, daring the Kremlin to watch. The world holds its breath. Earlier, Trump repeatedly urged Kyiv to accept territorial swaps, even suggesting surrender of Crimea or Donetsk. He met Vladimir Putin in Alaska and Volodymyr Zelensky in Washington, promising to broker peace with realistic concessions. Those talks faded into frustration as the fighting raged on for 3.5 years. Now his voice has turned, declaring that Ukraine should fight on until it restores its full map. What sparked this dramatic reversal? The battlefield tells a different story. Russian troops marched in parade dress, expecting swift victory, but met stubborn resistance and choking supply lines. The smell of diesel and burnt oil hangs over Donetsk, where Russia has poured countless munitions into Pokrovsk yet cannot seize it. Ukraine, meanwhile, has reclaimed 5 times more ground in that sector, launching precise drone and missile strikes on ammo depots, command posts, and airfields. Each explosion rattles the Kremlin's coffers, while the ruble tumbles, banks shut, and everyday goods cost double what they did years ago. Moscow's economy crumbles as Kyiv's resolve sharpens. Now the question looms, will Kyiv seize the moment and push beyond its borders, perhaps even into Russian territory? Trump's words echo across capitals, threatening to undermine Vladimir Putin's authority. The United States promises to keep supplying weapons to NATO allies, leaving the continent on edge. As the cold wind sweeps the front lines, soldiers on both sides hear the distant thrum of artillery and the silent hum of drones overhead. The next move could decide whether the war ends in a negotiated settlement or escalates into a far wider clash. Only time will reveal which side the tide truly favors. A shocking question haunts the world: could a single statement turn the tide of a war that has raged for 3.5 years? First, the recent fallout in Russia's economy is stark. The ruble has sunk, banks turned away, and the National Wealth Fund is draining under relentless military spending. Ordinary citizens now pay twice as much for basic goods. Even the economy minister, Maxim Reshetnikov, warned of a looming recession this summer. These facts support the bold claim that Ukraine now holds the upper hand and can drive Russian forces from occupied lands, restoring full sovereignty. This is the moment for Ukraine to act, the former president declared. Recalling a flashback, imagine the sound of distant artillery fading into a cold night, the metallic scent of rain on steel, and the hush as a lone soldier writes a letter home. That memory frames today's reality, Ukraine's spirit burning brighter while Moscow's coffers crumble. Next, the most striking line of the statement slips through: Ukraine could reclaim its country in its original shape, and perhaps go even farther. Such phrasing hints at an unprecedented possibility: Ukraine advancing beyond its borders into Russian territory. No previous endorsement of that idea had surfaced, making the words a strategic jab at Vladimir Putin's authority. The former president has often voiced frustration, recalling meetings that left hope flickering before Russian promises shattered the illusion. Now, consider the battlefield's rhythm: drones were overhead, the sharp crack of missiles, the acrid smell of burned fuel. Ukrainian forces have turned these sounds into tools, striking ammunition depots and command posts, chipping away at Russia's war machine. Each hit not only weakens the front line but also slashes the Russian economy, feeding the narrative of a crumbling empire. Finally, the lingering question hangs in the air like smoke on a winter dawn: will Ukraine seize this momentum to push beyond its historic borders, or will the world watch as the conflict stalls again? The answer remains hidden, waiting for the next move on a chessboard where every piece trembles with the weight of nations. A shocking question haunts every watch later: could the United States' most outspoken former leader suddenly turn the tide of a war that has already raged for 3.5 years? Imagine the rush of wind from relentless drone swarms, the acrid scent of burning fuel drifting over a shattered city, and the cold stare of a world leader declaring that a defeated nation might yet reclaim every inch of its lost ground. The very words that echo across continents could reshape strategy, frighten a Kremlin, and ignite new hope in a corner of Europe where hope has long been a fragile whisper. Earlier, the narrative painted a bleak picture. Optimism fluttered briefly, then faded as Russia promised peace to Trump while launching another record-breaking torrent of drones. The former president painted each dialogue with Putin as a good conversation, only to watch a bomb strike Kyiv, sparking fury that simmered into a new resolve. Deception and lies eroded trust, pushing Trump away from any attempt to favor Moscow. Now, the decisive moment arrives. Trump proclaimed that Ukraine, backed by Europe and the Atlantic Alliance, can fight and win back its original borders. He argued that with time, patience, and European funds, the war's starting lines are still within reach. Why not, he asked, daring the world to imagine a reclaimed nation rising from the rubble. He then ripped Russia's effort apart, calling the 3-year conflict a futile scramble that should have ended in days, describing a paper tiger stumbling through endless fuel lines and crumbling factories. He warned that Moscow's economy teeters on the brink, its ruble collapsing, its citizens paying double for basic goods. The shift is stark. Once, Trump urged Ukraine to accept territorial swaps, even conceding Crimea and Donetsk. Today he echoes the sentiment of many military analysts. Ukraine has grown stronger, mastering drone warfare, producing homegrown missiles, and outmaneuvering a once overwhelming foe. NATO nations, America, France, Germany, Poland, the Nordic states, and the United Kingdom, have poured weapons, training, and cash into Kiev's fight. Their support has leveled the battlefield, eroding Russia's numerical advantage. Observations from the front confirm this reversal. In Donetsk, Russian troops have labored for months to seize a modest city, Pokrovsk, yet have failed. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces have reclaimed 5 times more territory in the same sector. Combat drones and missile strikes now shatter Russian ammo depots, command posts, and airfields, delivering blows not only to soldiers but to the Kremlin's strained economy. Inflation soars, banks shut, and even the Russian economy minister warned of an imminent recession. Trump's final, provocative line hinted at a daring possibility: Ukraine could take back its country in its original form and, who knows, maybe even go further. Could a victorious Kiev push beyond its borders, striking deep into Russian soil? The implication rattles the Kremlin and forces the world to reconsider the conflict's endgame. The former president's message ends with a promise: America will keep supplying arms to the Atlantic Alliance, and those weapons will flow onward to Ukraine. The United States, he declares, will remain a steadfast pillar for Kiev, handing Russia an increasingly potent adversary. As the drumbeat of artillery fades into the night, one question lingers like smoke over a battlefield: will this bold declaration spark a decisive turn, or will it plunge the region into an even darker, more unpredictable storm? A startling confession has rippled through the world. The former leader of the United States announced that Ukraine can still reclaim every inch of its territory, backed by Europe and the alliance, and that Russia's prolonged war is a failing paper tiger. This bold reversal challenges previous calls for land swaps and promises to shake the Kremlin to its core. The opening scene paints a startling picture. Imagine the cold, metallic clang of distant artillery, the acrid scent of diesel smoke curling over a war-torn city. Trump, once urging compromises, now declares Ukraine, with European and NATO support, can win back all its land. He paints a future where the original borders reappear, urging patience, time, and deep financial aid. Why does this sudden shift matter? Could this be the turning point that forces Moscow to reconsider its strategy? The statement ends with a warning to Russia, describing its economy as crumbling and its people facing endless fuel queues, leaving readers wondering if the tide will truly turn. Building on that shock, the narrative moves to Kiev's own bold proposal. Zelensky steps onto the global stage, urging the United Nations to forge a joint air defense shield. He describes the whir of incoming drones, the flash of intercepted missiles, and the choking tension as families hear the warning sirens. If we shut down the skies, Russia must ground its war, he asserts, demanding that the Kremlin lose its aerial advantage. He points a finger at distant powers, questioning China's silence and pleading for a coalition of nations to stand firm. The imagery of flying metal against a backdrop of hopeful sky invites the question: will a united defense finally silence the bombers? The plea ends with a promise of a new security architecture, hinting at a decisive showdown. The final act intertwines both leaders' visions into a high-stakes gamble. Picture the crunch of snow under boots on a frontier line, the bitter wind carrying whispers of victory and defeat. Trump's promise of unrestricted support looms like a bright beacon, while Zelensky's call for a shared shield sounds like a drumbeat rallying allies. Both speak of economic ruin for Russia, plummeting currency, endless queues for fuel, a looming recession. The combined message asks: can Ukraine harness this dual push to drive the invader out, perhaps even beyond its borders? The story closes on an unsettling pause, leaving the world to wonder whether the next missile will fall or be shattered by a united sky. The fate of a nation hangs in the balance, waiting for the next decisive strike. Imagine a world on edge, where alliances tremble and every decision echoes across continents. What if one voice could tip the balance, challenging decades of diplomacy and redefining the future of a brutal conflict? The stakes have never been higher, and President Donald Trump just unleashed a bombshell that rattles not only Moscow but the entire globe. To recap, the recent developments revealed a striking transformation in Trump's stance on the Ukraine-Russia war. He shifted from advocating Ukraine's territorial concessions to boldly declaring that Ukraine, backed by Europe and NATO, stands ready to reclaim every inch of its land, and maybe even push beyond. This optimism springs from Ukraine's growing strength and Russia's weakening hold, both strategically on the battlefield and economically at home. Now, building on these seismic shifts, Trump unveiled a new strategy loaded with heavy consequences. At a high-profile event, he delivered a stark ultimatum: if Russia refuses to negotiate peace, the United States is prepared to unleash an aggressive round of tariffs targeting Moscow's economy. But this is no unilateral effort. Trump emphasized the crucial role of Europe, urging NATO countries to join hands in slamming tariffs that bite deep. Without unified action, these moves won't deliver the knockout punch they need. The air was thick with tension as Trump pressed harder, calling on NATO members to stop buying Russian oil immediately. He labeled the continued purchases by some allies as a shocking betrayal that undermines the alliance's bargaining power. It's not just a loss of leverage, it's a gift to the Kremlin's war machine, prolonging suffering and destabilizing the world order. These aren't mere words, they're a direct challenge to the very core of NATO's solidarity. Trump went further, naming China and India as the principal financiers of the conflict through their ongoing oil purchases. Picture it, two nuclear-powered giants quietly fueling a war from the sidelines, deepening the crisis with every barrel. He ripped into European nations for their paradoxical reliance on Russian energy while openly opposing Moscow's aggression. It's embarrassing, he declared, the weight of disappointment heavy in his voice, exposing awkward truths beneath polished diplomatic facades. In a moment charged with resolve, Trump answered a pressing security question with unflinching clarity. Asked about shooting down Russian aircraft violating NATO airspace, his response was a simple, powerful yes. This rare display of unwavering firmness sent ripples through international circles, signaling a readiness to defend borders with decisive force. The message is unmistakable: the coalition enforcing peace must stand united, fortified by economic sanctions and clear military boundaries. The war's outcome hinges not only on bullets and bombs but also on unified resolve and economic pressure applied with precision. But here's the question that lingers: will Europe's fractured commitments and energy dependencies loosen under this pressure? Can NATO rise beyond internal divisions to confront an adversary who underestimates its foes at every turn? Or will old habits and hidden interests blunt the sharp edge this moment demands? The smell of strained alliances and the rattling economic chains fill the air. Leaders face a choice: hold the line or watch the risk spiral beyond control. The coming days could reveal whether this bold strategy becomes a turning point or just another chapter in a brutal saga. Stay tuned, because what happens next could reshape the fate of nations and decide who truly holds the power in this epic struggle. Earlier we heard how Trump called the revelation a deep embarrassment for the Russians and vowed NATO should shoot down any intruding Russian jet. What if a former president just handed Ukraine a new battle cry that could upend the whole war? The claim landed like a thunderclap across Europe, shaking the Kremlin to its core. Trump announced that, with European Union funds and NATO backing, Ukraine could push forward and reclaim every inch of its pre-invasion borders. Why not, he wrote, his words echoing through basements and command posts alike. The statement turns the diplomatic tide on its head. Just months ago, Trump warned that Kyiv must sacrifice territory to achieve peace. He spoke of land swaps, urging Ukraine to accept a diminished map. Now he praises the Ukrainian spirit, declaring the nation ready to win back Crimea, Donetsk, and every lost region. The contrast is stark, and the world watches, breath held. Zelensky reacted with a mixture of surprise and relief. In an interview, he called the shift a big change and said he feels confident the United States will secure solid guarantees once the fighting ends. A little surprised, he admitted, but the lies Putin fed Trump made a difference. After private talks, the Ukrainian leader believes Trump no longer backs territorial compromises. We can't just swap lands. It isn't fair, he asserted, his voice firm, the scent of tobacco lingering in the studio. Behind the scenes, the battlefield tells a different story. Ukrainian drones buzzed over Russian supply lines, striking ammo depots, command posts, and airfields. Each explosion sent a shudder through the night, the acrid smell of cordite rising like a warning. In Donetsk, Russian forces have labored for months to seize Pokrovsk, yet Ukraine has reclaimed 5 times more ground around the city. The tide has turned, Kyiv's tactics grow sharper, while Moscow's economy strains under endless fuel queues and a weakening ruble. Russian banks flicker, international payment networks shut doors, and ordinary citizens line up for gasoline that drips slower than water from a cracked faucet. Even the Kremlin's own economy minister warned of a looming recession. The pressure builds, and Trump's words strike at the heart of that strain. Russia has been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years, a war that should have ended in days. Could this be the moment Putin finally sees a way out? Trump's blunt declaration may sow doubt in Russian command circles, forcing them to reconsider a war that has become a costly quagmire. As the frontline fires crackle, the future hangs on a fragile thread. Will Ukraine seize the chance to push further, perhaps even beyond its historic borders? Or will Moscow rally, reshaping its strategy in response to the new American endorsement? The answer lies in the smoke rising over the eastern plains, the distant rumble of artillery, and the whispered prayers of soldiers on both sides. One thing is certain, the conflict's next chapter will be defined by this daring pronouncement, and the world waits, ears tuned to the sound of history in the making. A startling claim exploded across the world. The former president announced a brand new war stance. What could possibly make a former commander-in-chief sound more daring than ever before? The sound of keyboards clattered, the scent of ink lingered, and a single sentence shattered expectations. Earlier, the former leader promised to end the conflict with bargaining power and personal talks. He had met both heads of state, yet the fighting still roared. Did his earlier pleas for land swaps betray the very people he claimed to protect? The memory of those meetings lingered like stale coffee, bitter on the tongue. Now, the narrative flipped like a sudden gust over a battlefield plain. He declared that Ukraine, backed by its allies, could reclaim every lost kilometer. Why not, he asked, eyes fixed on a map where borders glowed with hope. The words rang out, echoing through corridors of power, startling even seasoned diplomats. Ukraine's rise resembled a phoenix soaring above smoldering ruins. Drone swarms buzzed like angry wasps, striking supply depots with surgical precision. The nation forged missiles, matching the fiercest arsenals on the planet. Each victory tasted like fresh rain after a long drought, stirring a fierce, collective heartbeat. All the while, Russia's economy crumbled under an invisible siege. Long queues for gasoline hissed, while the ruble slipped like sand through fingers. Banks closed, and citizens felt the weight of empty wallets against cold metal doors. The markets shivered, and a once confident empire trembled with every foreign press release. Zelensky praised the shift, calling it a big turn toward realistic peace promises. He whispered that endless swaps were no longer fair, and that truth finally pierced the fog. How could a single conversation change the tide, he wondered, hearing distant artillery as a distant hum. His confidence surged, as if armor had been reforged in a hidden forge. The world now stands at a crossroads, the future trembling like a violin string. Will Kyiv push beyond its borders, daring to step onto Russian soil? Will Putin finally see that only negotiation can mend the shattered landscape? A silent question hangs heavy, waiting for the next thunderous drumbeat of decision.